Good afternoon. Thank you guys for taking time to meet with me today. I am going to be talking to you about my project, which has a lot to do with administrators and their understanding of best practices in transition services for students with disabilities. I am a transition facilitator for Baltimore County Public Schools. I have done that job for many years now, and I am super passionate about the field because my parents adopted two boys that had disabilities, and one of them was gainfully employed and went that track, and the other, unfortunately, didn't make it. So I'm pretty passionate because I feel like that's the difference between the two. I mean, obviously they're different humans, but if you could quantify it, that's kind of where my passion and drive comes from. I think if you can plug kids in, they have better opportunities and they make less disastrous mistakes there in their lives. So when I'm talking about this, it comes from a pretty deep-seated place in my heart, and hopefully you'll be able to see the need that I'm trying to fill. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Students with disabilities make up about 14% of the United States population. It's 7.3 million children. That's a 2019 statistic. The new ones have not really come out yet because of COVID. Students with disabilities are less likely to be employed after high school than their non-disabled peers, which is problematic for a variety of reasons, which I'll touch on later. IDEA federally requires services for students that are have disabilities, that they get post-secondary goals, and that they're being supported to achieve something after high school because they recognize it as a deficit area, and that's done through the IEP process. A lot of work has been done on the policy side of things to try to get the ball rolling because the dropout rates are so significantly different. I'm just speaking about Maryland here, but nationwide, this is a crisis. In Maryland, the dropout rate for students with disabilities is 8.5%, whereas a non-disabled students, their dropout rate is 5.3%. Specific learning disability, shockingly, has one of the highest dropout rates, which is 19%. Transition services is the legislated attempt to help bridge that gap. And of course, transition services in the state of Maryland wrap from 14 to 21. And those students are able to access supports and training programs and outside agency to help them learn about jobs, prepare for jobs, and get a leg up on the job market while still in school. It's just not going super well for those kids, and there's a lot of deficits and legalities, which we'll talk about. Obviously, the current systems and how we're doing things are not meeting desired outcomes because the statistics have not changed. The impact compounds for these students in that they're not just facing poverty, employment issues related to money, which would be the obvious, but they also struggle with then access to transportation and proper medical care, because those are acquired skills and not necessarily inherent. And administrators are the head of their school. They're in charge of being sure their teachers are trained, that academic success is for all students, that leadership is cultivated, that they continue to work to improve, and that data management and attainment procedures are in place. And part of that responsibility is being sure students with disabilities have full access to their education. So we know that they're not only struggling and they're behind their non-disabled peers. We know that effective transition services can reduce dropout rates because it's doing that in places that have very rigorous programs. We know that students with varying levels of disabilities have been researched. For example, there's a lot of research on students who are on the certificate track or maybe have autism or a significant impairment. There's a lot of research about those students and those families and how they feel transition is going, moving them to like a sheltered workshop type setting. We also know that there have been a lot of conversations with students with disabilities that made it to college in their first year, but what we're lacking is information about the gap students. So we know that educators have an overall lack in understanding, self-rated. We know that the comorbidities compound for these students. We know that it complicates their whole life. Uh, it's not just a dropout rate. We're speaking about the comprehensive life of these children as they transition to adulthood. And administrators can aid educators in getting training in understanding what meaningful experiences are, growth opportunities, and they can help use budgeting resources allocated toward these goals. The conceptual and theoretical framework that I'm working under, I had to combine two theorists to get a holistic picture of what we're trying to do. When you look at this picture, I chose an iceberg because what you typically see in this case is above the water, if you can imagine. And that would be students being gainfully employed, living independently, and being successfully transitioned. They have a diploma, they have life skills, and they're working well. That's what you would see, and that's a very small portion of students currently. However, the work that goes into that is underneath of that and needs to be beefed up in order for us to get more kids above water. And the actionable practices aren't just under one theorist, because we've got this school component and what the school is doing, but we've also got to train students to know what they want to do. So it's a twofold situation that comes together. So Kohler talks a lot about what's going on in the schoolhouse and how we're making the plans and doing the IEP planning process. Very important and heavy work. And he talks a lot about the integrity of the plan and the program structure and being sure there's interagency collaboration with outside agencies and doing that with integrity, which is crucial. However, Schlossberg moving through and moving out talks about 3 different phases of student development that the student has to go through in order to successfully transition as well, which is why they have to converge in order to be accurate. Students have to know what their background situation is, how much support they have, who they are as a person, and what strategies can I access based on my current network. Do my parents have money to send me to college? Do they not? Do I have to ride a bus? Do I need to learn to ride a bus? Can I learn to ride a car? Do I need adaptive services to ride a car? So those 2 things have to converge at the same time in order to get this right. We also know that research is lacking about administrator understanding of not only legislation, but how it impacts their own transition programs in their schools. The closest literature directly linked to administrators is on the screen in front of you. Bruce Carden surveyed 43 district and statewide administrators to talk to them about their competencies, and they held that special ed law, policy, and working with special ed students was their lowest competency. Shields surveyed 75 directors of special education. They had a completely different vantage point. They thought everything was great. Transition services are going well. 96% of them were happy with the way things were going, which is a direct contrast to what statistics show that students are not having success. There was research by Karkabi and Diamond that demonstrate the underpreparedness of teachers in this field in general, specifically about transition as well as a line item. They don't know how to make the plans, and they certainly don't know how to identify features of the plan that they have to work on in their classrooms on a daily basis. Green and Lambark talked with attorneys in California, and they held that transition and writing transition goals and activities and being sure that they were measurable and observable was the #1 litigious situation that they were dealing with special ed law. Now, I also reviewed tons of literature to guide me to some best practices of transition, because we know that what we're doing isn't necessarily super effective. So what works? I use those best practices, I compiled them, and then I use them to make my survey instrument. Here is a list of them. I'm just going to try to go through them pretty quickly. Uh, Best practices indicate that clear shared vision for post-secondary transition, refocused goals related to community involvement in every area, provide extensive resources and awarenesses for stakeholders to understand the disability poverty link, because if they don't understand it, we can't combat it. Train all stakeholders in what is reasonable, what is not reasonable as far as accommodations go, current legislation and processes. What are the current statistics? What are we doing? What's working? What's not working? Who are the players in that particular area as far as interagency collaboration post high school? Is it DOORS and DDA? Are there nonprofits that are doing better work? Share that information directly with families. Provide professional development. Communication is really crucial to everything. A lot of families reported in the family studies about their experience with transition, that they had a lot of cultural issues, and the way that they were talked to, or they were scared to talk to educators. Frankly, so some bridging of the gap there, and some communication skills need to be developed, building better relationships to engage with the community as a whole, including these jobs that are going to eventually be hiring students, have them feel more comfortable with making plans and modifying things for them, provide opportunities for students to practice life skills, including transportation, banking, budgeting, finding a house, employment applications, calling a doctor's office. All of those are crucial. Provide opportunities starting at the younger grades to teach career clusters, because they don't know them. So if they don't know them, they don't know their options. Require documentation, collect data on students who are doing these skills. We do that pretty well with our certificate students, but not with our diploma bound students. And our diploma bound students actually have worse statistics because it counts as an appropriate placement if those certificate students make their way to a sheltered workshop setting. Provide experiences that allow students to do mock interviews, mock jobs. Here's how much money I'll make. Let's look at a newspaper or an internet resource and find out what can I actually afford with that. Require work-based learning or career research and development coordinators to connect with the local universities, because they're being charged with making programs. Be sure that everyone knows about those programs. Parent education starting in early grades. To focus on employability, because a lot of times parents get lost in the minutia day to day, and they aren't looking at the big picture. Just to reinforce that. Arrange for stair-stepped repeated programming. We know our students need multiple exposures to information, and that is crucial. We know that arranging for students to complete all experiences isn't enough. They need a portfolio to show job employers that, hey, this is the experiences that I've had. These are the things I can do with this modification and that modification. We also need to talk a whole lot more about self-advocacy, because teachers and parents alike aren't pushing that as hard. And, if students get passionate about their own careers, that would be optimum. And from those best practices, I developed these research questions. Question 1 and 3 are quantitative. Question 2 is qualitative. Question 1 is, to what extent are the 14 best practices for transition implemented by secondary schools? I want to know what administrators know about the best practices and how often are they actually implemented in their schoolhouse. I want to know what challenges and barriers to the best practices are identified by building administrators. And I also am looking at, how does their knowledge of the law influence their plan development, their budget processes related to transition, and how does that further impact their decision making? And if there is a correlation between laws and post-secondary transition understanding. How does that influence their interactions with students, and how does that relate to transition plan awareness? The design for my study is sequential, explanatory, quantitative in phase 1, qualitative in phase 2. In phase 1, I'm going to do a survey that has multiple choice and Likert scale questions on it. I'm going to do a convenient snowball sampling distributed through electronic use of social media to various groups related specifically to special ed administration. And then I'm going to analyze the data. In phase 2, I'm going to do qualitative interviews. The interviews will then be analyzed for themes and trends. And of course, the advantages are that the quantitative data is pretty straightforward, and the interview is going to help interpret the quantitative data. I did a pilot study. It's in 2 parts. The first part I did on July 11th, and it was with an expert panel. We looked at the survey questions. There were 86 of them at the time. All 86 of them were modified, including 1 deletion, 2 additions. There were 8 participants in total, including a combined 75 years of service in the field of transition and a supervisor with 20 years experience. For the interview protocol, I did that on July 24th, and I met with an expert who had both of these pilots. They already received the information ahead of time and went through it, and then we went line by line. In the interview protocol, the expert had 20 years of experience in the field. All of my interview questions were edited to be more precise, and that's where I stand with both of the instruments. For data collection, I'm seeking 376 participants, a 95% confidence level. Participants have to be self-identified as middle or high school administrators working directly with students with disabilities. And I'm hoping to get 8 to 10 volunteer participants. If I get more than that for the interviews, I will continue until saturation is reached. And of course, I'm going to do that snowball and convenience sampling. There's a list of the groups that I've found related to special ed administration. My analysis plan includes descriptive and inferential statistics. And for the qualitative, I'm going to be analyzing for themes. When I do the quantitative, I'm going to be looking for frequency, measures of central tendency, chi-squared, Pearson bivariate correlation, and I'm looking for correlations between their personal, school, and demographic information. And then in the qualitative, I'm going to be coding transcripts and looking for emergent themes to help explain the quantitative analysis. As far as consent goes, all participants are informed of the purpose, the scope, and the use of the data obtained. They're going to be made aware of the approximate time to complete the survey. It should take them about 15 minutes to do the survey instrument, about 45 minutes I've allotted for the interview, unless it goes longer because they have more to say. And they're going to indicate consent by selecting this as a choice on the survey. And if they do not consent, they have an option to exit the survey. The survey is anonymous, and the only way that I could link it is if they give me their information to follow up for the interview. It's a voluntary process. And of course, it's going to go through the IRB process, and participants are all adults in sound mind, willing to participate and have given consent. And then my references, if you click here, they go. I don't know if you guys can see all this, but they're there. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Go ahead and stop sharing your screen and we can see everybody's faces.
Okay, I have a pause share. Stop video. Maybe if I do that. Okay, I think I'm good.
Nope, I still see it. Let me see if Let me see if it'll stop your, okay, there we go. Okay, perfect.
So Lacy, you had mentioned for the pilot, the expert panel. Can you talk a little bit more about the process you went through with the expert panel? I mean, you said you made some significant changes based on that. So just about the process you went through with them.
So I gave them the survey ahead of time and I asked them to take the survey. And then when we got all together in a group, we went line by line, question by question, and analyzed, where they felt people would get hung up or it wouldn't be clear or any questions that they had about what I was trying to ask. And we clarified it down further as a group.
Thank you.
No problem.
Lacy, if I may ask 1 or 2 questions. So I'm wondering about your qualitative research part. What software are you going to be using and what coding approach are you going to pursue? Do you have any thoughts about that at this point?
So at this point, I'm not sure, but what I can tell you is that I'm going to record the interviews. I'm going to rely on the methodologists that I have to help guide me with the expert opinions. But when we did it in class, we had a system of following through exactly what was said and keeping track of how many times it was said, and made charts and stuff ourselves. It wasn't necessarily a computer software program. It was only like the recording part and then the dictation part, which in class we used YouTube transcribed it for us.
Okay, I would strongly suggest you talk with your methodologist more about that. There's very good software to use. There's a couple of options. There's very good transcription software available these days. And the other thing is also to think about your IRB approval, because using, for instance, YouTube for transcriptions, that means that you have to place some of your data that might be confidential on a platform that's not sufficiently confidential. So that's the other reason why you want to use why you want to use software and as much technology as possible that doesn't run into IRB issues.
Okay, thank you.
And that's something that we have talked about, and most likely her interviews will be conducted through either Microsoft Teams or Zoom, which both have built-in transcription. So what we did in class was only a short piece, so that this would definitely not be posted in that manner.
So Lacy, thank you for an interesting presentation and congratulations, because you've been working on talking about this topic for a while, and it's nice to see that it's come to fruition. I know it's a topic that's passionate to you, both from your family considerations as well as from the work that you do. So in your dissertation, as you move forward, how will you address the issue of potential bias due to your kind of personal connection to the topic?
So I am asking very concrete questions, and from this point, I can't lead participants through. I mean, the results are going to be the results qualitative or quantitatively. In a qualitative measure, I'm going to kind of remove myself, because we're speaking about general practices in a schoolhouse. Obviously, I am passionate and I care, but I can't. How do we fix a problem if we don't understand it? So that's kind of the lens I'm looking through, because the problem is so huge, and I expect there will be things that will come through this research that I have no knowledge of, because my role is so different than an administrator. So I plan on addressing it, but I also plan on sticking to the script and and remaining very neutral about my conversations.
Okay, great. And follow up to that, as well as follow up to Dr. Declina's question, in terms of protection of human subjects. How will you defend that when you start looking for IRB and system approval?
How will I
It is, well,
defend?
it is a sensitive topic, right? So when conducting your interviews.
Sure,
what
it's a sensitive
protocol?
topic.
Mhm.
But the angle in which we're looking is what's going on in your school, what's working, what isn't working, how can we improve? It's not a tell me about a particular student. It's not a tell me your personal uh, it's more general in practice because we don't have any information about what is actually happening. So I think because of the way the interviews are structured and the content of the material, I don't think it will be as personal. They know globally that special ed is an area of weakness, and they know that we're trying to improve it, but we can't improve something we don't understand. So I don't know that it's going to be as problematic for them to answer the questions, because it's kind of like they all admit that they have a problem with special ed law. So where exactly are you struggling? Let's get the resources out to you. I think that's going to be where people are coming from. I don't anticipate a lot of pushback, just because on a national scale, everybody is admitting that they don't know. So if they don't know, let's figure out exactly what you don't know and let's fill in the gaps. I don't think our community is going to be on edge. I think they know that there's a gap. I think that the state is asking them to do a better job. So they know that this stuff has to be clear on a national scale, because even at the educational summits and stuff, they're talking about this. So it's not news to them. I don't think that there's going to be as much of a conflict because of the openness and the let's pull back and review that is going on a national scale with this topic.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lacy. At this point, I am going to pause the recording and we're going to put you back into the waiting room for a few minutes, and then we'll have you come back in once we have a decision